There comes a moment in life when you begin to realize that your energy, your time, and your presence are not infinite resources to be spent recklessly. You notice that you've been pouring yourself into places, situations, and relationships without stopping to consider whether they truly deserve that investment. At first, this realization is uncomfortable, almost unsettling, because for so long, your worth felt tied to how available you were to others. You believed that being endlessly accessible was a sign of kindness, generosity, and loyalty. But deep down, you've started to feel the quiet exhaustion that comes from giving too much without pausing to refill your own well. This awareness doesn't strike like lightning. It seeps in quietly. You start to see patterns you never questioned before. The late-night calls you always answered, the favors you always agreed to, the endless emotional labor you carried without complaint. You told yourself that this was simply who you were, a reliable friend, a supportive partner, a dependable co-worker. And while there's nothing wrong with being supportive, the problem arises when your own needs are perpetually pushed aside, when your identity becomes fused with being always there for others, even when it costs you your own peace. Carl Jung spoke often about individuation, the process of becoming your true self, separate from the roles and masks the world hands you. One of the first steps in that journey is recognizing where you've overextended yourself in order to fit an image, to keep the peace, or to avoid disappointing people. When you finally see this, you can't unsee it. You begin to notice every small moment where you agreed to something your heart didn't want. Every smile you forced to keep someone else comfortable. Every yes that was really a no you were too afraid to say out loud. At first, pulling back feels selfish. You might even feel guilty for wanting more boundaries, for wanting space to yourself. That guilt is a residue from years of conditioning. Lessons learned from family, culture, or early relationships that told you your value came from service, sacrifice, and self-denial. But the truth is, constantly being available doesn't guarantee love or respect. It often breeds expectation and entitlement in others. People begin to assume that your energy is theirs to use at will, and the longer you play that role, the harder it becomes to step away from it. As you start to reclaim your time and presence, the shifts are subtle but powerful. You no longer respond instantly to every message. You no longer rearrange your day to meet someone else's last-minute needs. You stop volunteering for responsibilities you don't actually want. And perhaps most importantly, you stop apologizing for these choices. At first, some people won't understand. They'll notice the change in your availability and may even push back. But this is where the real transformation begins, when you choose your inner balance over the comfort of others' expectations, when you begin stepping back from being constantly available. One of the first things you notice is how much mental space opens up. At first, it feels almost strange, like you're missing something. You've spent so long responding to everyone else's needs that the sudden quiet can be unsettling. But in that quiet, something valuable emerges. The ability to hear your own thoughts without the constant noise of other people's demands. You start to realize just how much of your life has been filled with things that weren't truly yours to carry. This newfound space isn't just physical time on your calendar. It's emotional breathing room. Without it, you may never have noticed how often you've overridden your own instincts to keep others happy. Maybe there were moments when your body felt tired, but you still said yes to a late-night conversation. Or when your mind was overwhelmed, but you took on another task at work because you didn't want to seem unhelpful. Slowly, you see that these patterns weren't random. They were ingrained behaviors reinforced over years, maybe even decades. As Carl Jung might frame it, your persona was doing the heavy lifting. This social mask you wore to be seen as agreeable, supportive, and dependable. But a mask, no matter how noble its appearance, is still a mask, and over time, it can suffocate the self beneath it. Pulling away from constant availability isn't just about setting boundaries with others, it's about removing that mask so your authentic self can breathe. Of course, not everyone will welcome this change. Some people in your life have grown accustomed to you always saying yes. They may subtly, or not so subtly, try to pull you back into your old role. You might hear comments like, "You've changed," or "You used to be so reliable," spoken as if setting boundaries makes you less caring. But you begin to understand that these reactions say more about their expectations than about your worth. This is where your inner work deepens. Instead of defending or over-explaining your decisions, you start practicing quiet confidence. You don't need to justify needing time for yourself. You don't have to convince anyone that your boundaries are reasonable. Boundaries are not an act of aggression. They are an act of self-respect. And the more you hold them, the more you see that they protect not just your energy, but the quality of your presence when you do choose to engage. An interesting shift happens here. Your relationships start to change in quality. People who only valued you for your constant availability may fade from your life. This can feel like loss at first, but over time you see it as a clearing, a space for connections that are built on mutual respect rather than convenience. The friends who remain are those who understand that your time is precious and who appreciate the moments you choose to share with them. You also start noticing how your energy feels more focused. Tasks that once felt overwhelming become manageable because you're no longer scattering your attention in 100 directions. Even your creativity may return because it finally has the room to breathe. You discover hobbies, interests, and even small pleasures that had been pushed aside under the weight of constant obligation. And perhaps the most profound change is internal. You begin to redefine what it means to be kind or helpful. You realize that kindness given at the cost of your well-being isn't true kindness, it's self-erasure. Real generosity comes from a place of wholeness, where you give because you genuinely want to, not because you feel trapped by expectation. One of the most liberating realizations in this process is that you don't have to be available to everyone at all times to be a good person. For years, you might have equated constant accessibility with love, loyalty, or friendship. But the truth is, your worth isn't determined by how quickly you respond to a message, how often you pick up the phone, or how many sacrifices you make in a week. This understanding marks a turning point, one where your self-esteem begins to be shaped from within, not from the approval of others. As you start saying no more often, something interesting happens. You learn to say yes more intentionally. When you do choose to spend time with someone or help with a task, it comes from a place of genuine desire, not obligation. The quality of those interactions improves because your presence is no longer diluted by resentment or fatigue. You're there because you want to be, not because you feel you have to be. This shift also reveals who respects your boundaries and who only valued you for your availability. Some people will adapt, appreciating the new clarity in your relationship. They might even be inspired to reassess their own boundaries. Others, however, may push back, using guilt or subtle manipulation to try to restore the dynamic that once served them. When this happens, you begin to see the truth of Carl Jung's insight. The moment you step into your authentic self, you inevitably disrupt the roles others have assigned you. The discomfort of these changes is real. You might feel tension in relationships that once felt easy. You might even question whether setting boundaries is worth it. But the more you stand in your truth, the more you realize that the right people will adjust, and those who can't were never aligned with your well-being in the first place. You also start to notice the impact this has on your mental and emotional health. Without the constant pressure to be on call for everyone, your nervous system begins to settle. That low-level anxiety you once carried, wondering who might need you next or whether you're doing enough, starts to fade. In its place, you find a sense of groundedness that feels both foreign and deeply familiar. as if you've returned to a natural state you didn't realize you'd left. This groundedness spills into other areas of your life. Your decision-making becomes clearer because you're no longer acting from a place of depletion. Your priorities sharpen. You begin to choose not just based on urgency, but on alignment with your values. Even small choices like how you spend a free afternoon start to feel more deliberate and satisfying. Perhaps most importantly, you stop over-explaining yourself. In the past, you may have felt the need to justify every no with a long list of reasons, as though you had to prove your right to rest. Now you recognize that no is a complete sentence. You don't owe anyone a performance of guilt or apology to validate your boundaries. This quiet confidence not only changes how you relate to others, but also how you relate to yourself. You start to trust your own judgment more deeply. And with that trust, you begin to see that making yourself less available isn't closing yourself off from life. It's making room for the life you actually want to live. You're no longer scattered in a dozen directions trying to meet everyone else's needs. Instead, you're rooted in your own center, offering your presence from a place of choice, not compulsion. When you root yourself in this new way of being, the shift becomes visible in ways you didn't expect. People start to notice, not necessarily because you've told them about your boundaries, but because your energy feels different. You're calmer, less reactive, and more intentional with your words. There's a steadiness in you that wasn't there before, and it subtly changes the dynamic in every room you walk into. At first, this calm might feel unusual. You've spent so long being responsive, jumping into action at the slightest request, that slowing down can feel almost rebellious. But as you grow comfortable with it, you realize that not every call for your attention is urgent, and not every invitation requires a yes. You begin to understand that your time is not just a resource, it's a reflection of your values. Carl Jung often emphasized that true change happens when you become aware of the unconscious patterns that drive you. One of the most powerful realizations in this journey is recognizing how much of your constant availability was driven by a deep need for validation. Without that awareness, you might continue saying yes out of habit, convincing yourself you're being helpful when in reality you're seeking reassurance that you matter. Once you see this clearly, it becomes harder to fall back into old patterns. This is where boundaries transform from something you set into something you simply live. They're no longer a checklist of rules you enforce. They become a natural extension of how you move through the world. For example, you no longer feel the urge to respond immediately to messages that interrupt your focus. You allow calls to go to voicemail without guilt. You pause before agreeing to commitments, giving yourself the space to decide whether they truly align with your priorities. Inevitably, some relationships will fade during this transition, not out of malice, but because the dynamic that once held them together is no longer there. You start to realize that many connections in life are situational. They thrive under certain conditions, but naturally dissolve when those conditions change. This is not a failure, it's a sign of growth. By stepping into your authentic rhythm, you make space for relationships that can meet you there. The beauty of this process is that it teaches you to trust both the arrivals and the departures. You no longer cling desperately to people out of fear of being alone, nor do you push them away to protect yourself. Instead, you let relationships ebb and flow naturally, knowing that what's meant for you will stay and what's not will drift away without force. This trust extends beyond relationships. You begin to apply it to your work, your passions, and your personal goals. You stop chasing every opportunity out of fear you'll miss something. You recognize that being selective is not the same as being closed off. It's a way of honoring your energy so that when the right opportunities arrive, you have the space and strength to embrace them fully. And with this trust comes a newfound sense of freedom. You're no longer a prisoner to other people's urgency or your own fear of missing out. Your availability is no longer a reflex, it's a conscious gift you offer, and only to those who respect it. The people who remain in your life begin to mirror this respect back to you, creating an environment where mutual understanding and genuine care can flourish. As your availability becomes a conscious choice rather than an automatic reaction, you start to see the ripple effects in every area of your life. The constant tension in your shoulders begins to ease. The mental clutter that once made it hard to focus starts to clear. Even your sleep improves because you're no longer lying awake at night running through endless lists of what you should be doing for other people. One of the most profound shifts happens in your relationship with time. Before, it often felt like you were racing against the clock, trying to fit your own needs into the gaps left over after everyone else's demands were met. Now you reverse that order. You start by making space for what matters to you and only then decide what you can offer to others. This doesn't mean you stop helping or supporting people you care about. It means you do so from a place of strength instead of depletion. You may also notice your creativity returning. When you were constantly available, your mental bandwidth was consumed by other people's problems, schedules, and crises. With that constant drain gone, ideas begin to flow again. You might pick up a hobby you once loved but abandoned, or feel inspired to learn something entirely new. The more you nurture this side of yourself, the more you realize that creativity isn't just about making art. It's about creating a life that feels aligned and fulfilling. This alignment changes how you approach challenges. In the past, if someone was upset with you for not being available, you might have immediately tried to fix it, even if it meant sacrificing your own well-being. Now you pause. You remind yourself that other people's reactions are theirs to manage. You can listen and respond with empathy, but you no longer compromise your truth to avoid discomfort. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Each time you honor your boundaries, you're stepping closer to that truth. You're no longer living in reaction to what others expect of you. You're shaping your life around what genuinely matters. That shift may seem small on the surface, but it changes everything. And while some people may leave your life because of these changes, others will be drawn to you in a deeper way. They'll sense the authenticity in your presence and the steadiness in your energy. They'll understand that when you choose to spend time with them, it's because you truly want to be there, not because you feel trapped by obligation. This selective availability naturally filters your relationships. You begin to be surrounded by people who respect your time and energy, who see you as a whole person rather than a resource to be tapped into. This mutual respect creates a healthier dynamic, one in which both sides feel valued, heard, and appreciated. Perhaps the most surprising part of this journey is that you realize how little you've actually lost by being less available. You feared that setting boundaries would shrink your world, but instead, it has expanded it. You've gained clarity, peace, and a sense of freedom that constant availability never gave you. You've discovered that your presence is most powerful when it's given deliberately, not demanded endlessly. With this new approach to life, you start to feel a deeper sense of ownership over your days. Before, it was easy for your schedule to be hijacked by the needs and urgencies of others. Now you notice that your calendar reflects more of your own choices. There's room for rest, creativity, meaningful work, and the kinds of relationships that truly nourish you. This is not selfishness, it's self-stewardship, the conscious care of your own energy and well-being. Interestingly, this change also impacts how you see productivity. You realize that being busy isn't the same as being effective. In the past, constant availability kept you in a state of perpetual motion, but not necessarily in alignment with your true goals. Now you can direct your focus toward fewer but more important things, completing them with a clarity and depth that wasn't possible before. Another unexpected gift of this transformation is the confidence it builds. Each time you hold a boundary and see that the world doesn't fall apart, your trust in yourself grows. You begin to understand that you are not responsible for managing everyone else's emotions. That was never your job, even though you may have been conditioned to believe it was. Carl Jung often spoke about individuation, the process of becoming the person you are meant to be, free from the masks and roles society places on you. Your journey of becoming less available is, in many ways, a step toward individuation. It's not just about managing your time. It's about aligning your life with your authentic self, rather than the version of you that was shaped solely to please or serve others. And with this alignment comes a quiet strength. You stop seeking validation for every choice you make. You no longer need a chorus of approval before you can rest, say no, or prioritize yourself. The peace you feel is self-generated, and because of that, it's far more stable than anything external could offer. Of course, this doesn't mean life becomes free of conflict. There will still be moments when people misunderstand your intentions or feel hurt by your boundaries. But instead of rushing to repair their feelings at your own expense, you've learned to stand firm with kindness. You can be compassionate without collapsing your own needs to meet someone else's. Over time, this balance becomes second nature. You naturally choose connections that are reciprocal and environments that respect your time. You're no longer drawn into one-sided relationships where your value is measured solely by how much you give. This creates space for bonds that are deeper, healthier, and more fulfilling. Relationships where both giving and receiving flow naturally. And as you continue to protect your energy, something remarkable happens. Your availability gains more weight. When you do say yes, it matters more. People sense your intentionality, and it deepens the value of your presence. You've shifted from being a constant, taken-for-granted presence to being a meaningful and impactful one. This shift into intentional availability also changes the way you experience yourself. You begin to notice that you feel lighter. Not because life has suddenly become easy, but because you've stopped carrying so much that wasn't yours to hold. There's a freedom in letting go of the invisible weight of always being on call, and it creates a subtle but powerful transformation in your mood, your thoughts, and even your body. In the past, you might have mistaken this constant availability for love or loyalty, but now you see it differently. True love and loyalty are not measured by how quickly you respond or how often you sacrifice your own needs. They are measured by the quality of presence, the honesty of your interactions, and the respect you show both to others and to yourself. When you operate from this place, your relationships naturally deepen. Not because you're doing more, but because you're showing up as your most authentic self. You'll also notice that your interactions become more deliberate. You no longer engage in endless small talk, just to fill the silence. You stop agreeing to social obligations that leave you feeling drained. Instead, you choose moments and conversations that are nourishing, that inspire growth, or that bring genuine joy. This selectivity isn't about closing yourself off. It's about ensuring that the time and energy you give actually align with the life you want to live. Carl Jung often pointed out that much of what drives us lives in the unconscious, and part of our work is to bring those patterns into awareness. This journey of becoming less available does exactly that. It forces you to look at why you were always available in the first place. Was it fear of rejection? A desire to control how others saw you? A belief that your worth was tied to your usefulness? Once you see those patterns clearly, you can make different choices. Ones that are rooted in self-awareness rather than fear. This self-awareness also changes how you respond to the world. Instead of reacting to every request or crisis with urgency, you pause. You check in with yourself before giving an answer. This small act of mindfulness can prevent resentment from building up. because you only say yes when you truly mean it. It also communicates to others that your time is valuable, which encourages them to treat it with more care. Over time, your life begins to reflect this new balance. Your days are no longer overrun with obligations that deplete you. There's more space for what actually matters: your passions, your health, your loved ones, and your inner growth. You begin to feel a deeper sense of agency over your life, as though you've reclaimed not just your schedule, but your identity. And perhaps most profoundly, you discover that the people who remain in your life are there not because they need you constantly, but because they truly value you. These are the relationships worth nurturing. Connections built not on dependency or expectation, but on mutual respect and genuine care. As you fully integrate this way of living, you begin to understand that your availability is a form of currency, and you decide to spend it wisely. You're no longer scattering it across situations and people who drain you. Instead, you're investing it in what genuinely matters. This doesn't mean your life becomes smaller. In fact, it becomes richer. Every yes now holds weight and meaning because it's a deliberate choice, not a reflex. The beauty of this transformation is that it creates a feedback loop of well-being. By preserving your energy, you show up more fully for the things and people you care about. Your presence is no longer diluted by exhaustion or resentment, and the people around you feel the difference. Conversations deepen, collaborations flow more smoothly. Even moments of silence feel more comfortable, because they're shared intentionally rather than filled out of obligation. Carl Jung spoke often about individuation as a path to wholeness, becoming the person you are meant to be by integrating all aspects of yourself, both light and shadow. In a way, this journey of redefining your availability is part of that process. It forces you to confront the shadowy parts of your people-pleasing tendencies, to see where your desire to be liked or needed may have kept you trapped in unhealthy patterns. By acknowledging and integrating those truths, you reclaim the parts of yourself that were once scattered across the demands of others. What's remarkable is how this shift subtly influences every decision you make. You no longer measure your worth by how busy you are or how much you can endure. You measure it by the integrity of your choices, the alignment of your actions, and the peace you carry within yourself. Your life begins to feel less like a series of obligations and more like a reflection of your deepest values. Even challenges start to feel different. Instead of overwhelming you, they become opportunities to practice your new boundaries. A last-minute request doesn't immediately send you into problem-solving mode. You pause, you assess, and you decide whether it aligns with your priorities. This doesn't make you cold or selfish, it makes you intentional. And that intention is what protects your energy in the long run. Most importantly, you realize that this change isn't temporary. It's a new foundation. You've rewritten the unspoken agreements you once had with the world, replacing them with ones that honor both you and the people you care about. You no longer have to prove your worth through overextension. You no longer mistake exhaustion for contribution. Instead, you know that your most valuable offering to the world is your whole, authentic self, and that self can only exist when you protect your time, energy, and boundaries. If these reflections resonate with you, consider subscribing to our channel. Every video we share is designed to support your journey toward living with more clarity, intention, and self-respect. Join us, and let's keep walking this path together.